The wild hogs and wild sows had a great day yesterday, and we're going to do the same thing again, God willing, on the 16th of November, but this time we're going to Kukaini. They tell me there's civilization there, so that'll be good to see, and we'll be leaving from my place again at 10 o'clock on Saturday the 16th of November, if you'd like to be a part of that. In the midst of all the wonderful blessings that God bestows upon us, there will be difficult days, anxiety-ridden circumstances, and times of stress in relationships with our nearest and dearest, and in the other parts of our lives. At such times we can feel between a rock and a hard place, or in a fix, or up against it, or at our wits' end. And in those situations we can be paralysed with fear and give up, because we do not know what to do. And at other times we're so afraid to do anything lest we make the situation worse. One humorous example of being between a rock and a hard place is a lawyer who specialised in medical malpractice claims. And he was in need of major surgery, and his surgeon was the last case that he won his case against. So I think he was wondering what his life would be. Today, some of us may be facing a predicament because of wise or unwise decisions in the past, or caught up in circumstances that are beyond our control. The result is that we are squeezed into a tight place that we cannot get out of, and we may have been there for some time. Today I want us to be encouraged and uplifted by what we view in Exodus 14. Because it was an impossible situation that Israel faced, but God miraculously delivered them from it. And you know, you may be interested to know that when the writers in the Old Testament referred to God's miraculous interventions, it was this miracle of the crossing of the Red Sea, more than any other, that they drew people's attention. Before I go any further, I want to say that maybe the only answer to what you are facing at the present time is a miracle from God. And the truth is that we have such a compassionate and awesome God who actually delights in doing the miraculous on behalf of his people, which is what we're going to see in this story this morning. Now, by way of background, we need to remember that up to the crossing of the Red Sea, these Jewish people had been living in Egypt all their days. Their entire life experience had been Egyptian, dominated by Egyptian gods and culture, so that they thought like Egyptians. So before the Red Sea, God wanted to continue their re-education in their whole understanding of himself. It was for that reason that God brought Israel to the Red Sea. There are many keys to the Christian life, to enjoying it, to living it, but I believe the greatest key is our understanding of God. J.B. Phillips published a book called Your God is Too Small. And I believe that is true of so many Christians. We need to be continually educated in who God really is. Look at this verse, beginning our study from Exodus 13 and verse 18. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness, by the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up armed out of the land of Egypt. The point is this, that the Hebrews were in this impossible situation because of God's leading. And now look at verse 21 of the same chapter. Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might go by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night didn't depart before the people. The second point is that the Lord was going before them. The cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. That is an incredible state of affairs. You and I have never experienced it. They never knew anything else on this journey. Have you, like me, wrestled with the will of God? Where does God want me to go? What does God want me to do? They never had that problem. Their life was just follow the leader. The cloud moved forward, they moved forward. The cloud turned to the left, the right, they turned right. When the cloud stopped, they stopped. And at night, they had the fire to give them light, warmth, and protection. Now, wouldn't that take the hassle out of living the Christian life? Now, look what it says in Exodus 14:2. This is God speaking to Moses. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by Pi-hahiroth, I'll never get that right, between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore across from Baal Zephon. Moses spoke these words to the Israelis without a moment's hesitation, because he had taken 40 years to learn that when God tells you to do something, you do it. Now, what we need to understand about this place, Baal Zephon, is that it was a cul-de-sac. It was a dead-end street. There was no way out. To the north stood the formidable, massive stone Egyptian fortresses. There was no escape through there. To the south was the Egyptian desert. There was no protection there. To the west was the road back to Egypt and Pharaoh. And to the east was the Red Sea. So before the Red Sea, north fortresses, south desert, west Egypt. They were boxed in by God's appointment. From a military point of view, they were defenceless. It was like being chased in the city by some thieves, and you take a left turn only to find that you've run into a dead-end street. That's what it was like for these people. They were in a dead-end street. Now, let's look what God says to Moses. Exodus 14 and verse 3. Then Pharaoh will think, the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness. And once again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord So the Israelites camped there as they were told. God is saying to Moses, Moses, I've got a plan that's going to blow your mind and blow the minds of the people. You see, God knows what he is doing with us. He's got Pharaoh in his hands, and he will lead him to a disaster that will forever etch in the minds of the Egyptians and the Israelis who God is. You see, God not only sees the big picture, God is actually painting the big picture. Again, let us remember that the Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for generations, so everything they had experienced from the plagues and the deliverance from Egypt was a sharp learning curve in their understanding of God. You see, God is so much more than what he revealed of himself to Abraham, to Jacob and Joseph. He is so much more than some tribal god. Their God, as they will learn, is Lord of the earth, the Creator, the Redeemer, awesome in power and awesome in grace. The Israelis are about to learn that. And I believe the church needs to relearn it again. What the Israelis and what we have to continually learn as we face each hard rock experience is that we are there because of God's appointment. And the God who has led us there knows totally our situation, knows totally what we are facing, knows totally what he is going to do. And he asks us, in the midst of that challenge, to trust him. Just to trust him. Now the plot really begins to thicken. Back in Egypt, all of a sudden the Egyptians are thinking, what were we thinking, letting these people go? Who are going to build our cities? Who are going to do all those menial tasks that they've been doing for generations? And so the Pharaoh says, right, we're going to go and get them back. He assembles the whole army. He assembles even his 600 best charioteers. And they chase after the Israelis. And they catch up with them at Baal Zephon. Suddenly, the scene changes for the Israelis. When they were leaving Egypt, they raised their fists in joyful triumph. High fives all around. But now they hear the sound of the chariots. They see the dust. And they know there is nowhere, there is literally nowhere to go. And they haven't got a weapon. I can imagine a mum and dad standing there seeing all this happen with their children and feeling like people in some of those towns in Syria, even as I speak. Realizing that they are facing certain destruction. Knowing that the wrath of Pharaoh will be without mercy. And so panic grips their hearts. Look what it says in Exodus 14 and verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, The people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord. They were scared to death. And it's here for the first time that we read that the Israelis collectively, in mass, cried out to the Lord. You know, a hard place does that to us, doesn't it? It's interesting what a hard place does to our self-confidence. We are walking through life, putting it all together, bit by bit. Everything's going according to plan, and then bang, we hit a situation, a set of circumstances that can ruin us and pull to pieces everything that we have strived to achieve. We realise that we are in a hard place, and we cry out to God. And as one wag put it this way, he said, we cry out, Lord, help me. And God says, trust me. And we say, is there anyone else up there who can help me? Hard places are inconvenient. They're difficult. They're stressful. They cramp our style on the road to success and prosperity that we have been told should be ours. Well, after they cried out, there was no immediate relief. So they looked for someone to blame. And Moses was the obvious choice. He was the one who had led them to this dead-end street. Look what it says in Exodus 14 and verse 11. And they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? And what have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness. Moses, we told you this was going to happen. And now we're going to die. I can't believe what they said. They had seen one of the greatest deliverance of all time. When the most powerful nation in the world was brought to its knees without them firing a shot. When every god of Egypt was seen to be utterly powerless and useless, and Yahweh was seen to be almighty, omnipotent. And yet here they are, facing their first test, and it's, why did you do this, Moses? We were safe in Egypt, which they were not. They were dying like slaves. You know, this is the way of the natural human heart. When things get bad or tough, it's so easy to think we were so better off in bondage rather than all the opportunities of freedom, whatever the struggles may be. You see, hard places make us question the roots of our life. And usually, people will blame someone else for what's happened to them. But now look at Moses. He is like a rock. One of the best pieces of counsel that you'll ever find in the scriptures. Exodus 14 and verse 13. Look what it says. But Moses told the people, don't be afraid. Just stand still and watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. You know, hard places are difficult for everyone. And here's Moses feeling enormous pressure from the whole of the nation, 1 million people strong at least. But he hands out excellent counsel, which is hard for people to hear in tough places. And in fact, Moses is the embodiment of all that he is saying. First he says, don't be afraid. They're thinking, Moses, look, we can almost see the whites of their eyes. We are going to be massacred. And you're telling us not to be afraid? We'd say today, Moses, you need to change your medication. Moses is saying, I can see them, but I can see them through God. And so I'm saying to you, don't fear. You know, in hard places, fear distorts the truth. And fear causes us to be ruled by doubt. And then he says, just stand still. Very wise counsel. Because what could they possibly do? There was nowhere to run. And then he says, and gives them the reason. You see, God is a reasonable God. He doesn't tell us to take the plunge without giving us reasons as to why we can confidently take the plunge. He says, watch the Lord rescue you today. You see, if we start running around in fear, we can hinder what God wants to do. Because the Lord has it all in hand, and he wants us to just watch and see him work and see how he will pull off the impossible. Does that mean we do nothing? That we don't act responsibly? No, it doesn't. We get on with our lives. We do the things that need to be done. To do otherwise would be irresponsible. But there comes a moment, there comes a time when we cannot do anything. And it would be irresponsible to do anything. We just need to trust God. And his last word is, just stay calm. Or in other translations, be quiet. A Randell translation is, shut up. But you know, there is something extra special. And you know, look, I've had to contain myself to not rush to this because it's so magnificent. But there is something extra special about being in hard places with God. As we read earlier, these people were camped at Baal Zephon, a cul-de-sac, a dead-end street, no way of escape. The word Baal is a pagan word which means God or Lord. Zephon means hidden treasure. Baal Zephon means the God of hidden treasure. When we are between a rock and a hard place, if we follow Moses' counsel, don't be afraid, stand still, watch, and be quiet. Not only will God answer our prayers, but we will discover that He Himself is our hidden treasure. And that our hard place becomes the very arena in which He reveals Himself to us in a way that we have never known before. We don't know how long God will leave us in a Baal Zephon. In my ministry life, I was in a ministry that was a Baal Zephon for 8 years. And there was no way out. But while I was there, what I learned about God was magnificent. So that I can speak to you as I'm speaking to you today. And you know, the other wonderful thing is this, that in spite of what's coming against us, in spite of all those chariots that were pouring down on those Israelis, they were very safe in Baal Zephon, because the scripture tells us in that chapter that as the Egyptians were coming, the pillar of fire went between the Egyptians and the Israelis. The Egyptians had no way of touching the Israelis. And so when you and I are in a hard place, in a Baal Zephon, not only is there's this wonderful revelation of the God who is, the awesome God, but there is also His protection. You can't be touched. And what's more, you have His very presence. Baal Zephons are wonderful places. Not pleasant at the time, but even at the time, as we dwell in a Baal Zephon, we can discover a God whom we've never known. Look at Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 18. Therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. He therefore exalts Himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for Him. The human response in a hard place is to fear, to run, to look for an easy way out, to keep talking about it. The faith response, in short, is to wait on God and receive His deliverance in whatever form and at whatever time He chooses to release us. And in every Baal Zephon that we find ourselves, we have the living Christ with us. Well, the Israelis did what Moses told them to do. They couldn't do anything else. And as we say, the rest is history. But you see, this story tells me very, very clearly that with our God, there are no dead-end streets. no dead-end streets. Only opportunities to prove his grace, to experience his power, and to live in the joy of his faithfulness. The Barcelona Olympics of 1992 provided one of track and field's most incredible moments, in which a young man by the name of Derek Redmond was between a rock and a hard place. Britain's Derek Redmond had dreamed all his life of winning a gold medal in the 400-metre race, and his dream was in sight as the gun sounded in the semi-finals at Barcelona. He was running the race of his life and could see the finish line as he rounded the turn into the home stretch. Suddenly, he felt a very sharp pain go down the back of his right leg. He fell face first onto the track with a torn hamstring. Sports Illustrated recorded the dramatic events that followed. As the medical attendants were approaching, Redmond fought to his feet. It was animal instinct, he would say later. He set out hopping in a crazed attempt to finish the race. When he reached the home stretch, a large man in a t-shirt came out of the stands, hurled aside a security guard, and ran to Redmond, embracing him. It was Jim Redmond, Derek's father. "You don't have to do this," he told his weeping son. "Yes, I do," said Derek. "Well then," said Jim, "we're going to finish it together." And they did. Fighting off security men, the son's head sometimes buried in his father's shoulder, they stayed in Derek's lane all the way to the end. As the crowd gaped, then rose and clapped and wept. Derek didn't walk away with the gold medal, but he walked away with an incredible memory of a father who saw his son in pain, left his seat in the stands to help him finish the race. That, dear friends, is what God does for us when we place our trust in him. In Jesus Christ, he has left the stands and is running the race with us. So when we are experiencing pain, when we're struggling to finish the race, we can be confident that he is with us. Because Jesus said this, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world." And I close with this quote. Look at it from Oswald Chambers. "Faith is unutterable trust in God, trust which never dreams that he will not stand by us." That is our God. Let's pray. Great and loving Father, we thank you for this amazing story this morning, Lord. And I pray that we will have heard its message well, that in all the hard places of life, you are there. And that, Lord, you are our treasure. Not the things we desire, not the things we want to happen, not the places we'd like to go, not the deliverance even that we need, but in the hard places of life, you are the one who is our treasure. So, Lord, this morning I pray for any who are struggling in whatever situation they face. May they heed your word to stand still, to be calm, to see you, Lord, deliver them, and to just be quiet. And in it all, to be supremely confident that the God who loves them would never dream for a moment of leaving them stranded. We thank you for your wonderful faithfulness. In Jesus' precious name.